Even after the final ropes stopped moving, the executions continued serving their purpose. Every body left beside a harbor became a warning visible from the decks of arriving ships. The Crown had discovered that fear could fight piracy long after the condemned were dead. By the early 1720s, gallows, prison cells, naval patrols, and iron gibbets were closing the Atlantic to the Black Flag, proving that for many pirates the final voyage ended not with treasure, but beneath a rope.
Enjoy the video, and don't forget to subscribe.
Trace your finger along the map from London across the Atlantic toward Jamaica, and picture the early 18th century, when the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rope, human sweat, stale bilge water, and burned black powder followed captured pirates from their ships to the gallows. During the Golden Age of Piracy, execution was deliberately transformed into public theater designed to terrify thousands of sailors. Number 5 begins with Captain William Kidd, once a privateer carrying letters of marque, who was condemned for piracy and murder and brought to London's execution dock on May 23, 1701. Kidd had commanded the 287-ton Adventure Galley, a vessel approximately 124 feet long, equipped with 34 oars and heavy square rigging supported by tarred hemp shrouds, deadies, chain plates, and massive oak mast partners. Her curved hull depended upon interlocking white oak futtocks, corked seams packed with oakum, and repeated careening to remove marine growth. Yet none of that machinery could save her captain. Kidd was transported through streets crowded with spectators before reaching the tidal execution ground at Wapping, where condemned pirates traditionally faced the Thames they had once sailed. A hemp noose was placed around his neck, its twisted fibers stiffened by moisture and repeated handling. The cart or support beneath him was removed, and the rope broke. Kidd crashed downward alive. Officials did not interpret the failure as mercy. Another rope was prepared, the knot positioned again, and the execution repeated while the crowd watched. This time the line held, tightening beneath his jaw as his body suspended above the muddy riverside. But death was only the beginning of the punishment planned for Captain Kidd. Kidd's corpse was taken down only so the authorities could prepare an even more enduring warning. His body was coated in tar to slow decomposition, enclosed within an iron framework shaped around the torso and limbs, and suspended in a gibbet beside the Thames, where sailors entering London could see what piracy promised: salt wind, rain, tidal moisture, insects, and oxidation slowly attacked flesh and iron, while the blackened remains hung for years. Yet number 4 was even more terrifying because it demonstrated how quickly an entire pirate brotherhood could be destroyed. On March 28, 1722, at Cape Coast Castle on the coast of West Africa, 52 members of Bartholomew Roberts's captured company were sentenced to death after the Royal Navy's HMS Swallow shattered Roberts's organization. Roberts had commanded the Royal Fortune, a heavily armed captured vessel carrying dozens of cannon behind thick oak bulwarks. Each gun depended upon breaching ropes capable of absorbing violent recoil, while its black powder commonly combined approximately 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur. When ignition reached the charge, rapidly expanding gases drove iron shot through hull planking, crushing lignin-bound oak fibers and transforming splintered timber into lethal fragments. But after Roberts was killed off Cape Lopez on February 10th, his surviving men faced weapons they could not fight: shackles, cords, and gallows. 52 condemned pirates were divided between execution sites along the African coast. Men accustomed to articles of agreement, elected quartermasters, captured treasure, and broadside combat now stood restrained beneath ropes measured only to support their weight. One after another, they were hanged, turning the destruction of Roberts's fleet into one of the largest mass executions associated with the Golden Age of Piracy. Number 3 begins in Charleston, South Carolina, on November 8, 1718, when Stede Bonnet and his crew were tried after a career that had transformed a wealthy Barbadian landowner into one of the Atlantic's most notorious pirates. Bonnet's Revenge was a purpose-built sloop of roughly 60 tons, carrying approximately 10 cannon within a compact hull whose pronounced tumble-home concentrated structural strength around heavy oak futtocks secured by hand-forged iron fastenings. Heated pine tar protected hemp, standing rigging while oakum driven between planks expanded against seawater, yet Bonnet abandoned the security of plantation life for a deck ruled by articles of agreement, loaded pistols, cutlasses, and cannon smoke. His capture produced a spectacle Charleston authorities intended every sailor to remember. 29 members of his company were hanged at White Point on November 8th, their bodies suspended near the harbor approaches where incoming vessels could observe the consequences of piracy. Bonnet temporarily remained alive, writing desperate appeals for mercy while awaiting judgment. On December 10th, 1718, guards marched him toward the same execution ground. Contemporary accounts described him as physically weakened and emotionally broken, a dramatic contrast to the armed captain who had once hunted merchantmen along the American coast. The gallows required no sophisticated naval engineering. Upright timber posts, a crossbeam, hemp rope, and gravity accomplished what cannon could not. The noose compressed the structures of the neck as his body dropped beneath the beam. Charleston had destroyed not merely a captain, but almost his entire surviving command, proving that capture could reduce an independent pirate company from an armed floating society to a line of condemned men waiting beneath the same rope. Number 2 unfolded at Port Royal, Jamaica, on November 18, 1720, when Calico Jack Rackham was executed after Governor Nicholas Laws's campaign against piracy ended his final cruise. Rackham's swift sloop depended upon shallow draft rather than overwhelming firepower, allowing it to move through Caribbean passages where larger naval vessels risked grounding. Beneath its waterline, overlapping oak planking was fastened against curved futtocks and sealed with oakum before careening exposed the hull for scraping, caulking, and applications of heated protective compounds. Above deck, blocks transferred enormous loads from salt-stiffened canvas into masts, stays, chain plates, and deadays. Such mobility had allowed Rackham's company, which famously included Anne Bonny and Mary Read, to seize small vessels around Jamaica. But in October 1720, Captain Jonathan Barnett surprised and captured them. Rackham was tried at Spanish Town on November 16th and condemned to hang 2 days later. The authorities carried him to Gallows Point at Port Royal, once a notorious center of privateering wealth, taverns, merchants, and seamen. There the pirate captain who had operated beneath a black flag faced a simple hemp rope rather than naval gunfire. After death, his corpse was reportedly displayed in chains on a small island near the harbor, later remembered as Rackham's Cay, converting the remains into a navigational warning. Tropical heat accelerated decomposition while salt spray coated the exposed ironwork, and every passing crew could understand the message without reading a proclamation. Yet the execution occupying Number 1 would demonstrate punishment on an even larger scale when dozens of pirates were condemned after one catastrophic surrender and colonial authorities turned an entire shoreline into a theater of death. Number 1 belongs to the destruction of Bartholomew Roberts's pirate company in 1722. After HMS Swallow killed Roberts off Cape Lopez on February 10th, more than 100 surviving pirates were captured and carried to Cape Coast Castle. Their former floating society had been governed by articles of agreement defining shares, discipline, compensation for wounds, and voting rights, but British courts replaced those rules with chains and death sentences. Trials beginning in March produced 52 executions. Groups of condemned men were transported from confinement toward gallows erected along the coast. Hemp ropes, twisted from multiple yarns into load-bearing cordage, were secured above them while soldiers prevented escape. One after another, the supports were removed and bodies dropped beneath the beams. For sailors watching from anchored ships, the executions were unmistakable. Roberts's once powerful fleet had been reduced to rows of prisoners dying under British authority. The surviving members of Roberts's company received radically different sentences. Some were imprisoned, others forced into servitude, while men judged coerced into piracy could escape the gallows. 52 did not. Their executions represented more than punishment for individual crimes. They demonstrated the collapse of the enormous pirate network Roberts had built across the Atlantic. Only weeks earlier, his ships had carried cannon, powder, captured cargo, spare spars, water casks, and crews hardened by years of pursuit. Now the same Atlantic coastline displayed their bodies as warnings. Kidd's tarred corpse beside the Thames, Bonnet's condemned company at Charleston, Rackham's remains near Port Royal, and Roberts's mass executions reveal the calculated logic behind pirate justice. Authorities wanted punishment to remain visible after death. Gallows and gibbets became instruments of psychological warfare, announcing to every sailor entering a harbor that the freedom promised beneath the black flag could end with iron chains, a hemp rope, and a corpse left facing the sea.